Muchas gracias, Eduardo, por esta presentación con muchísima información muy interesante. Y vamos a pasar a la que va a ser la última ponente de las charlas antes de la mesa redonda. Y tenemos la suerte de tener con nosotros pues, a Livia Maltese, que viene de la Universitat de Mons en Bélgica. Y hay que confesar que Livia, perdón, te estoy llamando Livia es realmente la causa de que hayamos hecho esta jornada aquí, ¿no? Porque aprovechando que venía a Baleares precisamente para recoger información sobre los aspectos de Xylella fastidiosa, no puramente científicos, sino también con cierto aspecto socio-ecológico, pues vimos que era la ocasión ideal para realmente conocer lo que está haciendo, este enfoque que quizás no es tan habitual en nuestras charlas y por eso pues aprovechamos para organizar esta jornada con todos vosotros. Bien, pues Livia, como decía, es ahora mismo estudiante de doctorado en la Universidad de Mons y es ecóloga, estudió biotecnología, pero ahora está más especializada en ecología agroforestal. Y su investigación explora sobre todo por las complejidades de plantaciones, aunando lo que sería información medioambiental en la zona mediterránea y también información pues, social e incluso socioeconómica en algunos aspectos. Así que muchísimas gracias, Livia, por aceptar también dar esta charla y cuando quieras cargamos tu presentación. Bueno, Livia hará la presentación en inglés. Allora, questa. Grazie mille, Livia.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone, I hope you still have some energies left to listen to me, especially because I'm speaking in English, so additional barrier. First of all, I would like to thank Miguel for organizing this seminar. And I have two main premises. The first one, I'm sorry for not speaking Spanish or Catalan, but I don't want to ruin my reputation from the beginning. So you will excuse me if I will stick to English. And then the second premise is that I'm at the preliminary stages of my research. I just started in October. So I come here with many questions and not so many answers. But that's the nice part of going abroad and meeting new people. Like you can explain your questions and maybe get some answers or get even more questions. So today I will talk about the similarities and differences of Xylella fastidiosa in Salento and in Mallorca. And I will explain to you some gap that I found in literature, especially regarding the socio-ecological aspects. So a bit about myself. As Miguel was already saying, my name is Livia Maltese. I am born and raised in Italy. I did my master in biotechnology, and I specialized in plant biotechnology at the University of Roma Tor Vergata. I then moved to the Netherlands, and I did my master in forest and nature conservation, specializing in ecology of agroforestry systems. These two paths seem quite distant from each other, but what I liked about biotechnology was the extreme attention to the micro world. But I was what I was lacking was a broader picture of how the micro world then interacts with the broader perspective, the broader ecology of the landscape, and how this affects, for example, environmental health and also climate change. And now I'm doing my PhD at the University of Mons. I changed again my field, let's say, because I'm doing it with the School of Sociology and Anthropology, but I'm co-supervised by my master supervisor in the Department of Forest Ecology and Forest Management. So a bit more about my research. My research is part of the Terra project, Terrestrial Politics in the Anthropocene, and it explores the complex realities of plantation diseases and environmental transformation in the Mediterranean basin. And we use Xylella fastidiosa as the entry point to study these questions. But what does it mean terrestrial? Well, like the circles should be in the terrestrial part, but it's all messy now. Terrestrial is a concept that was invented by Bruno Latour, which was a sociology and anthropologist, a French sociology and anthropologist that specialized in science and technology studies. So he studied how scientific knowledge is produced and then established and diffused among the population. And he defines terrestrial as the set of agents that are caught up in the same destiny and who must decide how to share a world. What does it mean? What he says is that, let's say, the modern approach to the ecological issues is that humans are the main agents, then act, and the environment is just a passive element that responds to what humans do. The terrestrial perspective, on the other hand, sees the rest of the beings apart from human as having their own set of interaction, their own balances that are indeed affected by humans, but have also their own way of behaving. And this was clear with climate change, for example. Climate change, as we know, is something that is caused by humans, but the consequences of climate change go way beyond human prediction and action, let's say. In the context of Xylella fastidiosa, what we see is that, well, what Bruno Latour says is that, as I said before, Earth is an active agent. So Xylella is a result of complex interaction that include humans, but also include the bacterium that behaves in ways that humans not yet totally comprehend and predict. This perspective goes beyond the global-local divide. As we see with Xylella, global economy, so global trade, affects local dynamics, both from a social and from an ecological point of view. What it suggests, what it advocates for, is going from control to coexistence. So as we see, for example, here in Mallorca, it's very important to find ways to coexist with the pathogen. As Eduardo was saying, there are many subspecies, many sequence type of the pathogen, and many more to be discovered. So it's hard to eradicate everything. So it's also important to find way to deal with the pathogen and coexist with the pathogen. And then it advocates for new politics of care. So cooperation across disciplines, as we're trying to do today, for example. So cooperation between epidemiology, entomology, but also social sciences, and among species. So understanding how Xylella works, how the insect works, and how we can interact with them. Why in the Mediterranean basin? So this red thing should be around the Mediterranean. Well, the Mediterranean is an important biocultural landscape. What it means is that the landscape can be defined biocultural is a result of complex interaction between nature and culture. For example, cultural traditions, so farming system, ways of managing water, shape biodiversity and the ecosystem structure. Land use creates multifunctional landscapes that have very important ecological and cultural values, so both for nature and people. These values also affect the way that people manage the land. And there are certain elements in the landscape that become iconic. So they can be described as living cultural and ecological records. This is the case for olive trees in Puglia, in which the olive tree is not just a source of income, but people are extremely attached to the tree, to the point that the eradication measure that were imposed in Puglia created a huge mess among people that arrived to, they even like tied themselves to the trees to avoid trees to be eradicated. But I also saw in Palma de Mallorca a beautiful olive trees in the middle of the city. So there are these elements that become very important for people. Before getting into the differences between Salento and Mallorca, I wanted to make sure that everyone knows where Salento is. So we are in Puglia, which is the heel of the boot, which is Italy, and Salento is the more southern part. This is the part where Xylella was first detected and where basically most of the olive trees are nowadays dead. But Xylella is also moving northward, and it's going up until Bari, which is there, okay? So it's moving northward, and that's kind of a big issue for us. So why am I here? Well, I was curious to see if, despite the different contexts, there are similar issues affecting both Mallorca and Salento. And I was also curious to see what are the future perspectives for agriculture, both here and in Salento. And then I also value a lot international exchange. So I was sure that I had something to learn from all of you. So that's why I'm here. So going to the similarities, well, we know that Xylella fastidiosa, among the many species that it affects trees that have high cultural value, perennial trees that have high cultural value. In the case of Salento, it's olive trees. In the case of Mallorca, is almond trees, but also many other. But Xylella is not the only problem affecting these two places. In fact, there is a huge issue of abandonment of rural areas. This is connected to several factors. One of the factors is the intense tourism. Tourism is competing with farming for land, so the price of land is increasing very much, and farming is not profitable enough to sustain the pressure. So what young generations are doing, they are abandoning farming to move to the cities, move abroad. In the case of Italy, they are also moving abroad. Look at me. And they prefer to work in the tourist sector. The tourist sector is not just threatening farming because of this competition for land, but it's also competing for water. In fact, both in Salento and in Mallorca, there is incredible water shortage, and tourist infrastructures are also competing for that. But what are the differences? Well, the main difference is that Salento is part of Italy, which is a peninsula. The problem with a peninsula is that the pathogen can spread throughout the whole peninsula, and this is extremely scary for us. So there are eradication measures that we have to put in place to avoid that. Well, Mallorca is an island, and the sea acts as a natural containment zone. Of course, it's still important to control and to eradicate in case, like to avoid the death of every single plant, but let's say that the sea helps with that. In Italy, the main subspecies affecting olive tree is the subspecies Pauca st53. Even though, as Eduardo was saying before, there are different subspecies that are being discovered now and more panic is being generated now. While here in Mallorca, there are many different subspecies affecting different plants. And as Eduardo was saying again, Mallorca is a hotspot for Xylella fastidiosa. Another difference, and that's quite interesting, is that in the Salento area, where we saw an extreme death of olive trees, some trees are resprouting. Some trees that were completely desiccated are resprouting again from the base and from the top. A difference that I saw, of course, here is that, according to what I was reading in some articles, olive trees seem to have lower mortality rate. I read it in one of your articles, then we can discuss about that, because I found that very interesting. How is it possible, apart from the different sequence type, but what are the other factors affecting this difference in mortality? That's something I would like to go deeper into. And also almond it was already, almond cultivation was already declining and was substituted by carob. Well, it seems like in Italy, people are sticking to olive trees. They don't want to abandon olive trees. They want to continue with that. And well, this is a picture that I took myself in the field, and that's an olive tree that resprouted. So you see that the upper part is completely dry, but then from the bottom, there are some green parts. So that's quite interesting, I would say. What I did until now, I did a literature review. So I gathered more or less 200 articles talking about Xylella fastidiosa in Apulia, and I clustered them according to 8 different categories. Pathology, vector ecology, monitoring and diagnostic, management and control measure, socioeconomic and policy impact of the disease, but also of the eradication measure, ecological and environmental drivers of spread, and environmental impact of the treatments and the reviews. What I found interestingly is that 38% of the studies focus on monitoring on eradication, while another 40% of the studies focus on vector, pathogen, and host interaction, while only 3%, let's say 6% in total, focus on the ecological drivers and consequences of Xylella fastidiosa, and only 10% focus on the socioeconomic impact that this bacterium is having. Why so? Well, we know, I think you know better than me, that according to the Stevens triangle, the existence of a disease is of a biotic caused by a biotic agent absolutely requires the interaction of a susceptible host, of a pathogen, and of an environment that is favorable for the disease development. Conversely, if you want to halt or eliminate the pathogen, you have to eliminate one of the 3 factors. What we see in the case of the olive quick decline syndrome, the pathogen is Xylella, the host is the olive trees, and the environment is embodied by the insect vector. Which I understand, because it's very important to understand the epidemiology behind Xylella. But I must also say that as a forest ecology, I also recognize that trees are not standalone entities. They are just placed in a landscape, but they should be regarded as an integral part of the landscape, rather than isolated organism. So any investigation of a tree also implicates the broader ecological context in which the tree is present. So Xylella, as we see, emerge in a context where relationships go way beyond this triangle of the pathogen, host, and insect vector. In fact, as Eduardo was saying, there are climatic factors affecting the spread of the bacterium. There are different plants that interact with the host plant. There are fungi, there are other microbes, and there are other animals. What we see in this diagram is that something is lacking at the base, and what is lacking is humans. So if we know that ecology is the study of how living things interact with each other and with their environment, then we must also take into account the ecology of humans, so how humans interact with each other and with the environment that surrounds them. These interactions are affected by several factors, which is the geography, the knowledge that humans have, the management strategies, the power dynamics, economic availability that they have, and the policies that they enact. In the case of Xylella, for example, we saw that an extreme globalized trade system combined with several other factors that are partially studied, partially not studied, caused the emergence of a pathogen. And I think that what is needed is a broader socio-ecological approach to understand what other factors, apart from the famous triangle, are affecting Xylella fastidiosa, why it arrived there, why it's spreading, how is it possible, like how are people reacting and how their reactions are affecting the presence of the bacterium. In fact, if we look at if we pay close attention to the traditional landscape of Puglia, we see an immense monoculture of olive trees. Anna Tsing, which is another sociologist, would define this huge monoculture, these landscapes, as plantations, which are simplified ecological systems designed for the production of a single commodity. What she also noticed is that this landscape may lead to ferroproliferation, which is the unmanageable spread of plantation augmented life in form of disease and pollution. How did I learn about this more complex interaction between social system and ecological system? Well, I learned about it looking at the example of coffee rust in Mexico. In fact, we know that coffee arrived in Mexico around 1790s. It was first planted following the traditional way of doing of indigenous people. So it was integrated with other culture under the shadow of the forests, and they went on like this for quite a while. Later on, in the 20th century, there was a huge intensification called technification of coffee plantation for revenue purposes. In the meantime, the coffee leaf rust arrived in the Americas in 1980s, but it was not a problem for at least 30 years. But in Mexico, they saw coffee rust arriving in the rest of America, and they decided to take precautions. So they intensified the production, shifting to a plenosol production. So they cut the overstory and they left the understory completely exposed. This to reduce the humid environment in which they thought the fungus was proliferating. They also applied many fungicides, and they chose new high-yielding varieties that they thought were also resistant to the fungus. They went on like this until in 2012, the outbreak arrived in Mexico as well. There was a run to find new fungicide, to find new resistant varieties, but in the end they didn't manage, and what we saw is that a huge abandonment of farms happened, and people migrated to the US. When they tried to study what caused the outbreak, they noticed that they studied, of course, how the epidemiology of the outbreak worked, which is what we also did with Xylella. They found out that spores were transported by wind or by direct contact between leaves. So when they cut the tree canopy, leaving the other plants exposed, they increased the wind flow, which increased the spread of the spores. In the meantime, they also planted plants, resistant varieties next to each other, so plants were touching each other and were transmitting the fungus even more. Plus, there were no natural enemies because it was a huge monoculture with a lot of insecticides and pesticides. So no natural enemies were found that could halt the spread of the fungus, and there was no genetic diversity. So once one plant is susceptible, all the other plants are susceptible as well. What I concluded from this example is that it's extremely important to understand the epidemiology of the disease, but it's likewise important to understand the social drivers and the ecological drivers behind a pathogen. I think that I really understand why in these 10 years in Italy they focused so much on the epidemiology, because it was such an unpredictable thing and such a mess that they had to find ways to halt it as soon as possible. But I also think that after 10 years is also like the time has arrived to broaden the perspective and also integrate other points of view, other ways of studying. Then to go back to the resilient olive trees, I have other pictures to show you. So the first, I took these pictures myself when I went to the field. The first picture you see, there is a dead olive trees, and next to the dead olive trees, there are tourist sprouts coming from that tree that the farmers selected to produce new olives. In the middle, you see an abandoned plant that is completely green and some years before was completely dry. And the same plant produced some olive trees. Well, one thing is showing some olive trees. One other thing is producing enough olive trees to make oil. That's completely different. But I still think that it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. So what future perspectives do I see? As I said before, of course, I think it's important to study to approach Xylella from a socio-ecological perspective. It's important to cooperate across disciplines and countries, as we are doing nowadays. And what I will try to do in my research, I don't know, I'm still trying to understand, is looking into resilient olive trees. So what I ask myself is it just a momentary event or the last joy of the tree before dying definitely? Or is it something that is here to stay? What are the ecological causes behind the resilience of the trees? And what are the social consequences of the resilience of the trees? How do they change the narrative that has been done until now? Well, I'm done. I was faster than expected. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.